in the US, I think about 50 million people must have had a near-death experience. So really many, and a lot of people don't talk about it, or they're sent to a psychiatric institution because they just continue to talk about it.
330 to 350 million Americans, that's what, 1 out of 7 or so? But it's hard enough to get people to share near-death experiences, let alone a hellish near-death experience, because it can feel like there's something wrong with me and I'm going to this terrible place. There's, in my experience, an even greater reluctance to share that.
But you're totally right. I think there's a huge reluctance to share a positive NDE with others because the negative response they get.
Our guest today, one of the leading pioneers in near-death experience studies, had an experience in 1969 when he first began his cardiology training that he's never forgotten. What roused his scientific curiosity to begin reading books, talking to patients, and ultimately spearheading one of the most significant prospective studies on near-death experiences? What did he find, and why does he now reject materialism and believe consciousness continues after the grave? Dr. Pim van Lommel is the author of the best-selling book, Consciousness Beyond Life, and he joins us for one of his few interviews across the Atlantic. It's night for him, morning for me. Dr. Pim van Lommel, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, I've been so looking forward to this interview. I've done so many programs on near-death experiences, and you're one of the people I've wanted to talk with because of your history that you've done with this movement. But let's start with the experience you first had in 1969 when you began your cardiology training. What happened?
Well, I was working as a very young internship with one of the first coronary care units that started in the Netherlands. Because before 1967, all patients died with a cardiac arrest. But modern resuscitation techniques became like the defibrillation, the shock, and external chest compression. So that was the reason that coronary care units were started. And so we had a 40-year-old man with a myocardial infarction, and he got a cardiac arrest. And we resuscitated. We did CPR. He got 3 or 4 shocks. And after 4 minutes, he regained consciousness, and we were very happy. It was all new for us. I was the doctor in charge.
Yeah.
But the patient was extremely disappointed. and he said, oh, it was talking about a tunnel and a light and beautiful music and landscapes, etc. All new for us. I had never heard about near-death experience at the time. Raymond Moody published his book in 1975. So it's all new for me. I never forgot the event, but I didn't do anything with it. Just starting my specialization in cardiology as a family with 2 small children. So I was starting my cardiology, but again, I never forgot it. Until in 1986, I read the book by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, where he described a very deep near-death experience when he died as a medical student in 1943 of a double pneumonia. And was declared, there were no antibiotics available for this medical student. So he was declared dead. His body was covered with a sheet. And a nurse was so upset that this young medical student had died that she was able to persuade the doctor to give him an injection right into his heart of adrenaline. And he regained consciousness after 9 minutes. He had problems to find his body back because it was covered with a sheet. But he had a very, very deep and very impressive near-death experience, out-of-body experiences. He was out of his body some 100 miles away with a bar, but he later went there to see if it was all right. He was in very dark spaces as well, or frightening spaces as well. So, and that was the moment that I was so intrigued by this book. It was a very impressive book that just started to ask patients who had survived a cardiac arrest if they could remember from the period of cardiac arrest of the period of unconsciousness, if they had memories. And then to my surprise, between 86 and 88, I asked 50 patients who had survived a cardiac arrest, and 12 of them shared the NDE with me. And that was surprising, because, and it was for me a scientific curiosity, because I had read and learned that it should be impossible to experience consciousness, let alone enhance consciousness with cognition, emotions, memories, etc. When this cardiac arrest, when the body doesn't function and the brain doesn't function at all. So that was for me the scientific curiosity, and that was why we started a prospective study in survivors of cardiac arrest.
Yeah, so tell me what changed in 1986. You had this experience in 69. All of a sudden you read this book. Why 17 years later were you at a point where you were intrigued by this question?
Because of the book by George Ritchie. It was such an impressive, because the patient in 1969 just was disappointed that he was back and told me about music and landscape, but not, I didn't go into it. I didn't ask additional questions. But now I have read a very deep and impressive NDE, but also the transformation that George Ritchie wrote about. So that's what, and then I started to read also literature. I hadn't read the book by George Ritchie in '86. And when I was reading about the retrospective studies with selection of patients, scientists thought it was just because of lack of oxygen in the brain, neurotransmitters, hallucinations, etc. But it has never been a real scientific prospective study. And that's why we started with some other people to do this study, to see if there could be an explanation for the cause and content of the near-death experience.
I'm a professor of theology, and I've probably done 12 or 15 shows on near-death experiences on this program. So the idea of consciousness beyond the grave doesn't surprise me. It fits my worldview. But you describe approaching this with a very different worldview, kind of a materialistic worldview. So explain what that worldview was and how it was taught in your scientific and medical training.
Yeah. Well, we learned on school already, and also in the university medical school, that consciousness is a product of brain function. That was just a never proven assumption, never proven hypothesis. And everybody thought this was true without any discussion at all. And that's also in my medical study. So when I was confronted with the 12 patients who shared the NDE with me, then I should ask the question, how is it possible? It should not be possible at all, because in cardiac arrest, there's no brain function left at all.
That makes total sense. If it's reducible to the brain and matter, no kind of experience beyond the grave, plus such clear, captivating experiences when there's trauma, kind of defies that narrative as well. I want to show folks your books. It's called Consciousness Beyond Life. And it's a huge book. It's over almost 400 pages because it's such a careful scientific study. Now, I want to make sure people appreciate now there's a number of books, there's studies, there's shows on near-death experiences. But when you started this, there were very, very few. And even asking these questions, you were kind of a pioneer and a trailblazer and an outsider, even leaning into this, trying to study what was going on during these near-death experiences. So maybe tell us a little bit, if you will, about your unique study, what you found, and how you conducted it.
Yes, I'm happy to do it. So we started in 1988 with a prospective study in a total of 344 consecutive survivors of cardiac arrest in 10 Dutch hospitals. And we found that 18% of those patients reported a near-death experience, and 82% did not have any memories at all. So then we compared the two groups, the group with and without a near-death experience, if we could find an explanation why only 18% reported a near-death experience. So when we looked for the lack of oxygen in the brain, when we looked for the duration of cardiac arrest, if it had 3 minutes or 8 minutes, did it matter at all? If it had been 5 minutes unconscious or 3 weeks in coma, it didn't matter at all. We had some patients in the cath lab with rhythm disturbances studies where you have induced cardiac arrest, and they usually are resuscitated within 20 to 30 seconds. It didn't matter at all, the frequency of NDE. So the most important was for us that we could exclude lack of oxygen in the brain as an explanation for the cause for a near-death experience. All patients had been unconscious because of lack of oxygen in the brain, and only 80% reported a near-death experience. And then we looked for given medication, didn't matter at all. We looked for fear of death, a psychological explanation, didn't matter at all. We looked for gender or education or religion, didn't matter at all. If they were atheists or Christian or Muslims, didn't matter at all.
Mm-hmm.
We asked for pre-knowledge, that you know that these experiences are possible, didn't matter at all. So the main conclusion is that we could exclude all the, until that time, given possible explanations how to understand the cause and content of an NDE. And the second part of the study was a longitudinal study, where we did taped interview with all survivors of cardiac arrest with an NDE who still were alive, and a matched control group of patients who survived from cardiac arrest without any memories. A matched control group is the same gender, the same age, and the same time interval. And we did this study to see if the transformation people talk about, if it was just the result of the cardiac arrest, of the result of the near-death experience that has never been studied before in a prospective design. However, we found that only patients with a near-death experience reported the classical transformation. That is, no fear of death anymore. They are convinced that there is a continuity of consciousness after the death of the body. There's a new insight of what is important in life. That is, it's about unconditional love and empathy and compassion, first towards yourself, accept your own negative aspects we all have, and then towards others and towards nature, toward animals, plants, and planet Earth. And they feel connected with everybody and everything. That's why they sometimes also call the near-death experience an experience of oneness. They feel connected with everybody. Mm. And the third transformation is enhanced intuitive sensitivity, but it means that they know what other people think and feel. And it is quite disturbing for them as well, because you don't want it, but you get information about someone you see, and you know he has cancer, or he will die in 3 weeks, or his mother has died, whatever. You don't want to have this information. And this is a kind of information, the scientific word is non-local information exchange. It means that you receive information not by your senses and not by your body. And it is beyond time and beyond space. So you can see future events, you can see what people think and feel, etc. Now, so what we could find that the NDE has no scientific explanation as we thought. So no lack of oxygen, whatever. Mm. And the second thing, that the transformation is just due to the near-death experience and not to the cardiac arrest. And so the study was published in the Lancet, one of the major medical journals in the world, in 2001.
That's remarkable. You put it in such a prestigious medical journal. Now,
yeah,
I know.
Yeah, I have heard later from someone who knew people from the educational board, and they said it was a problem for them because the methodology and the statistics were very well done, but the subject of NDEs was a little problem for them. And at last they decided just to publish it because of the methodology.
Well, that's big credit for them for doing so, even if it challenged some of their worldview. Now, I know right now my audience has a bunch of questions. How do we make sense of this as Christians? I want to put pause on that. Tuesday night, I'm bringing on Steve Miller, Near-Death Experience. So join us live. We're going to talk about those things. Here, I want to talk about the research Dr. Pim van Lommel has conducted. So you hinted at this a little bit, but how was it received, not just from the journal, but in Netherlands and beyond, when you're challenging this materialist assumption and just really belief that people had? Were people excited about it? Were they resistant? What has some of that been over really the past 25 years since you published it in the early 2000s?
Well, when we were doing the study, most doctors in the hospital were not interested at all. They looked the other way around. But there were some colleagues who were open for it. When the Lancet study was published, it was a worldwide stir. It was on the front pages of all papers all over the world. I was just coming back from India, and it was the Indian Times. 3/4 of the front page was about our study.
Wow.
So I had to stop for 2 weeks doing my cardiology work because I had interviews from all over the world. People came to me. And then from that moment, I had 200 emails a day. So,
wow.
Yeah. So it was a lot of, hardly any critical comments, usually positive, and a lot of emails. I have had more than 10,000s of emails from all over the world from people who had the NDE and just wanted to share the NDE with me because they couldn't find anybody who was open. That was one of the problems. And we didn't discuss until now what is a near-death experience. Perhaps I should give a definition of it.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So the death experience is the reported memory of a special state of consciousness, mostly during a life-threatening situation, like cardiac arrest, like coma due to traffic accident of a cerebral hemorrhage, due to loss of blood in complicated childbirth, near drowning in children. And there are this near-death we have universal elements. First of all, they ask themselves, is this death? I'm dead now. And then they have an out-of-body experience where they can perceive from out and above the body their own lifeless body, and they see their own CPR or their own surgery from above, and they can perceive what is happening, and they can know what is being said. Even they know what people have been thinking about it because they have a direct thought transfer. Then they come in a dark space, but it can be frightening for them. About 20% come in a dark. Then they see a small light where they're attracted to, what they describe as a tunnel. Then they come in an otherworldly dimension with beautiful colors, beautiful landscape, beautiful music, but they don't know from this physical world. And then they can meet deceased relatives where they can communicate with. They recognize them as well. And then usually they meet a being of light. And Christian people, this was Jesus. They meet Jesus with a feeling of unconditional love and acceptance. And in this being of light, they have a life review. They relive their whole life from birth. And they relive it. It means that everything what you have done, what you have said, what you have thought is kept forever. And you have access to this. And you relive, when you have taken some plaything from your little sister, you know how sad she was. So you're connected with the consciousness of others as well in the past. Sometimes you have future events, flash forward as well. And then they can come to a border, and that can be a mist or mountains or a wall, and then they know when I pass this border, I will never come back. And they usually hear a voice, that can be Jesus, can be one of the deceased relatives, just a voice and said, it's not your time yet, you have to go back. You have some tasks to fulfill. And then they come back in the body, which is awful. Coming back in the body, when you feel again your body when you have the traffic accident, everything was broken and painful, and also the myocardial infarction. So coming back is awful. And then you're so overwhelmed by this experience that you want to share it with others, so with doctors, nurses, and they just say, oh, this is total nonsense, it's an hallucination, here you got some medication. And they stop talking about it. So it's a spiritual trauma, a near-death experience. You cannot share it with others. Their life has changed. They don't know that it has a word. They don't know that they're the only one. And it's a lot of depression, loneliness, and homesickness for years until they see a film or read a book or a radio program that it is called a near-death experience. And then they can start to accept it, which can take years. And then when they have accepted, they can integrate it into their life. They change the way they live. And we had done a study with 82 patients with an NDE with a time interval between 7 months and 70 years, with a mean interval of 24 years. Still, half of those patients did not have the possibility to share their NDE with others. They have been silent. I have met people who have been silent for more than 50 years because they couldn't share it with others. So it's a real spiritual trauma. And it is the most important and overwhelming experience you can ever have in your life. Also met a lot of physicians, doctors who said, what happened to me now, I've always said it's impossible. That has changed my life as well. So that's what's happening.
It's remarkable. Since I've started studying this and doing videos on this, it's amazing if I just listen how many more people have had experiences like this and are eager to share, not eager to share in terms of drawing attention to themselves, but eager to share because it was such a transformative experience for them. They want to be understood, they want to be heard. And so, having probably half a dozen people or so personally share their stories. But if people are watching this and you've had a near death experience or a deathbed experience, write it in the comments below. Share it here. One of the amazing things about the videos I've done is hundreds and hundreds of people have just shared their accounts, in many cases for the first time. Now, one of
And
the
that's so important for them that they're able to share it, and that there's someone who is listening to them without any comment and prejudice. And that's a real problem for most people. So I have met, I think, thousands of people with an NDE, and I've met tens of thousands of emails from people who share the NDE with me. And it's so important that there's someone who is listening without any prejudice and comment. It's so important for them to try to accept it, their own experience, and then to integrate it. It's so important as well. And in the Netherlands, it must have been 600,000, and in Europe, about 25 million people, and in US, I think about 50 million people must have had a near-death experience. So really many, and a lot of people don't talk about it, or they're sent to a psychiatric institution because they just continue to talk about it.
So if in America there's 50 million, because there's probably
About,
330 to 350 million Americans, that's what, 1 out of 7 or so, you would say, are the
yeah,
best stats?
about of 5 to 4, 5 to 6. We don't know have exactly numbers because it's not registered. So we don't know exactly the numbers, but there have been some studies done in the US and Germany, and that comes between 4 to 6% of the general population must have had a near-death experience.
Now, this, again, this raises so many questions about what does this tell us about the afterlife? What is the afterlife like? Who is this person of light? I'm going to come back Tuesday and we're going to talk about all those, but I'm an
Yeah,
apologist. And one of the things that interests me is not just a story somebody shares, as much as that's important to listen and talk and help them process it in their lives. But
yeah,
when they seem to know things they could not have known in
yeah,
that physically near dead state, to me, that's a kind of evidence that says, wait a minute, this shows consciousness continues. And you have a few accounts like this that you talk about. I'm wondering if you could share with us. For
yeah.
example, the 44-year-old patient who asked a nurse for his dentures. What
Yeah.
happened there?
Yeah, that's a very intriguing case. It was also published in the article in the Lancet as well. So the 44-year-old man was found in a meadow unconscious, and people started to do some CPR, and they called the ambulance. When he was brought into a hospital, about 30 minutes later, he was already cold, had blue spots on his skin. There was no circulation, no breathing. His pupils didn't react to light. His corneal reflex was negative. His gag reflex was negative. So you could put a finger in his throat. So it seemed to be a hopeless case. And the first thing the nurse did was to give him oxygen for intubation, so give him a tube to give him more oxygen. And then they found out that he had dentures in the mouth, so they took out the dents and put it on the crash cart. And they continued for CPR for about 1.5 hours before this man had circulation and blood pressure again, but he was still in coma, was still ventilated. So he was transferred to the intensive care unit to continue artificial respiration for 1 week. And after 1 week, he regained consciousness and was brought back to the cardiac ward. And when he just came back, a nurse came in for medication. He saw the nurse and said, "You know where my dentures are." And the nurse was flabbergasted. They said, "You were there when I was brought into a hospital. You took the denture and you put it some on a car with all the bottles on it. There was a slider underneath, and there you put my teeth." So, and he could tell from a position out and above his body how the resuscitation room looked like from above. And he was brought in coma in this resuscitation room, and he was taken out of this room in coma and still could describe everything what was happening there. He could describe the people, like the nurses and the doctors who were there busy, but also the room itself. So that's, let's say, it's an objective proof of the subjective experience, like the perception out and above your body. And knew what was being said and knew where his dentures were put. So that's a very impressive case. And there have been many more cases like this, but not always so impressive. There has been a book published now, the self does not die. And it was when 128 cases of corroborated veridical perception during out-of-body experience, during near-death experiences. And it's so they have all interviewed the doctors, nurses, and family members to see if it was right. Yeah, the self does not die. It's a very intriguing book.
I am writing that down. I had not been aware of that study. You said
Now
100.
it's by Dutch scientists, but it was published by Irons.
Very interesting. Now, you also cite the Pam Reynolds case.
Yeah.
Would you either share that case or one of the other 128 that you also find pretty compelling?
Well, another case perhaps is also that you meet dead people you don't know that they were dead. But there's a peak in the dream experiences. So I had one patient who told me that during a cardiac arrest, he met his deceased grandmother and he saw a man who looked very lovingly to him, but he didn't know at all who it was. And 10 years later, at the deathbed of his mother, she confessed to him that he was married out of an extramarital relationship, his father being a Jewish man who was taken and murdered by the Nazis. And she showed him a picture. And he saw the picture, the man he had seen 10 years before during an NDE. It was his father. So it's always got the bumps. So that, and there are more stories like this. I also know one boy who had a traffic accident, was 3 weeks in coma, and during the 3 weeks in coma, his neighbor came down and said, "You have to go back." And later, when he regained consciousness, he heard that his neighbor had died in the period that he was in coma. So this is that you meet people you don't know they were dead and they are there. But Pamela Reynolds was a woman who had an aneurysm, let's say a balloon of one of her cerebral arteries. And when it bursts, you die. So in that time, in the 90s, they should operate this with patients. And what you do is to give them a heart-lung machine. So you get artificial circulation. You make the blood cold, so the body is getting colder. And then you lift the operation room like this, so the blood goes out of the brain. So there's no circulation. There's no blood in the brain. And then you have about 20 minutes to do the surgery. And in this case, she saw the instruments the surgeon should use to do all the brain surgery. And she heard voices who said, "We have to do other artery and veins because of the implantation of the heart-lung machine. They do it in the groin." So, and then at the end of her out near-death experience, she was sent back by her uncle, who was dead, and she didn't want to go back, but that he said, "You have to go." And then she saw her body on the surgery room, 2 shocks moving, and then she moved into a very cold body. She felt the coldness of the body as well. So, when you have this kind of surgery, you also know that the brainstem doesn't function at all, and the cortex doesn't function at all, and the body was cold, the brain was cold, there was no blood in the brain. And she still had a near-death experience. And that's a very important cases. Yeah.
That's a remarkable one that I believe Dr. Michael Sabom was the doctor there. I had a chance to interview him, and he walked through some of the details and how it shocked him and surprised him. And these instruments were covered up, and there were eye things covering her eyes. Like, it just, from a biological standpoint, makes no sense.
Exactly. And Bruce Grayson, NDE research has tried to do everything to do so all the medical files, etc., to see it was really happening. Yeah.
Bruce Grayson is one of the few near-death experience pioneers I'm still hoping to interview in due time.
He's a little bit reluctant to give interviews, but he's a wonderful guy.
That's what people tell me. Well, I appreciate you coming
on. Honest and kind. Yeah.
So let me ask you a few questions more about these. You walk through kind of in the book, which I appreciate. Again, as an apologist, people have different naturalistic attempts to explain these away. And I'd love if you would just walk us through why you don't find these convincing. For example, one of them that I've heard, and you write on this, is that near-death experiences were caused by oxygen deficiency, that there's some biological lack of oxygen in that part of the brain. Why isn't that sufficient?
Well, first of all, because the study we did that when you have cardiac arrest, then there's no blood going to the brain and there is lack of oxygen in the brain within 10 to 20 seconds. That's why you have the coronary care units. You have to do CPR as soon as possible, because when you are later than 5 to 10 minutes, people will die because of irreversible brain damage. And there has been studies done to see what happens in the brain during cardiac arrest. And there have been studies done in patients who had a threshold testing in internal defibrillators. So you induce cardiac arrest, and they had EEGs on the brain. And they also have been done induced cardiac arrest in animal studies. And what you see when you induce cardiac arrest, ventricular fibrillation, people lose consciousness within seconds. The blood flow to the brain, you can measure by Doppler, is 0 within 1 second. Then the body reflexes are gone. So the body doesn't react anymore, and it's a function of the cortex of the brain. The brainstem reflexes are gone, which is the gag reflex or the corneal reflex of widened pupils who don't react to light. The breathing stops because the breathing center is close to the brainstem. And the EEG flatlines between 10 to 20 seconds. There's no activity of the brain cortex as well. And animals have also the brain stem activity has ceased within 10 to 20 seconds. So we know that when there's cardiac arrest, within 10 to 20 seconds, there's no brain function at all left from the total brain, cortex, brainstem, etc. So, and in these circumstances, people can have enhanced consciousness with cognition, emotions, memories from early childhood, etc. It should be impossible if you still believe in the never proven assumption that consciousness is a product of brain function.
Now, in some ways, your response might sufficiently answer the next objection I hear, is that the near-death experiences could be hallucinations.
Yeah, hallucinations mean when you have an out-of-body experience, an hallucination doesn't fit in the objective reality. When you have an out-of-body experience, you can corroborate the veridical perception. You know what people have said and seen, etc. An hallucination is no corroboration possible because it just doesn't fit in a real.
That makes sense. That's
And
helpful.
then another thing is perhaps,
Yeah.
For an hallucination, you need a functioning brain. And the brain doesn't function in cardiac arrest.
So you need a functioning brain, which is not there. Plus, it's a purely subjective experience, but these are, in some cases, objectively verified. So therefore, it doesn't fit a hallucination.
Exactly.
What about psychedelics? We're hearing a lot of talk about psychedelics and kind of these otherworldly, almost supernatural type of experiences. Could that be a kind of cause for these?
No. Well, first of all, it is possible when you use psychedelics, you can have an experience of enhanced consciousness. And when you have an experience of enhanced consciousness, you also have the transformation. But first of all, it's dangerous. It's depending on the dose you receive, your psychological health, etc. So a lot of people get frightening hallucinations or whatever. But it hardly happens that people can have an enhanced consciousness. But it may happen, and then you have the transformation. And that can be after LSD, it can be after ketamine, it can be after psilocybin, so pados, etc. So it can happen, but it is rather rare, and you never have the elements as I talked to you before. You never meet deceased relatives. You don't have an out-of-body experience. You don't see a being of light. You don't have a life review or flash forward, etc. So it's different. But again, it can happen that you have an enhanced consciousness, but it is rather rare.
The objective verification for me as an apologist is really what's compelling, and it shows that any lack of CO2 or unrecognized brain activity cannot in principle account for the data that we receive from near-death experiences, because it's verified in some further fashion. And according to that new book, at least 128 cases, and I suspect there's many more. What about some people would say, well, people with near-death experiences are lying, they're inventing stories, they're misremembering. Rather than bring some scientific explanation, why isn't it at least possible or reasonable that some of the people telling these tales just got their facts wrong, or in some cases, maybe are being deceptive?
I think when I should talk to someone like this, I should be within 1 second know that it is not real. Especially, it's the reluctance and about the overwhelming experience. They're reluctant to share it with others. They're also very emotional. And there's the transformation. And you cannot talk about the transformation if it's not there. So it's for me quite clear that it's not just trying to be interesting at all. When you really had an NDE, you feel it, you know it, you see it.
That's what I read, and that's what the people tell me. There's just a certain look on their face of how profound it is.
Yeah.
And I would highlight that, yes, there are some cases in which it seems that stories have been invented and books have been pulled. But just because there are some cases doesn't mean most or certainly all of them are that way. It just doesn't logically follow whatsoever. Okay,
No.
so you had your first experience 1969. It affected you, but kind of stored it away. 1986, 17 years later, became interested in this, started reading the book by Ritchie, a few others. 88 started your study, and then published in a major journal 2000 or 2001, which means you've been studying this 3 into 4 decades. At the beginning, there was such a resistance to this. How have things changed, either in the medical world or in the public, in terms of the reception or openness to near-death experiences since your first experience and research?
Oh, it has changed a lot. First of all, also mention I published my book in the Netherlands in 2007, which now the 32nd print in Holland.
32nd print.
And it is now translated into 12 languages as well, like Chinese and Russian, but also a lot of modern languages as well. Yeah, that's the English version.
That's all I can read.
Yeah. And so there have been a lot of comments as well, but a lot of invitation from medical schools and from medical students as well, but also psychology students. I've been lecturing in all universities in Holland, but also in Germany, in the Sorbonne, in Yale University, in England, some universities as well. And the younger generation is so open for it. Your doctors are open for it. So I'm very positive. Max Planck has once said, when you have a new theory, don't try to convince the scientist, because wait until they die, and the younger generation will see it as normal and accept it as normal. And that's what's happening now. The older generation is reluctant. And I understand the reluctance because they're frightened. They always have said, or neuroscientists and also psychologists and some philosophers said that consciousness is a product of brain function. And they've written articles about it, written books about it. And now they should be wrong. So they're silent. And they're frightened that they have been wrong as well. I know some professors who personally tell me, you could be right, but officially says this is total nonsense until they retire. Then they said, I was wrong in my life. So they're afraid for the position in the university, they're afraid for research money, etc. So they're frightened to lose their current materialist worldview. And that's so important, because when people talk about the near-death experience, and they talk about a consciousness beyond life, beyond time, beyond space, everything is interconnected. And consciousness is so before birth and after death. It's always there. So for me, it's always fundamental in the universe. Everything, what we can see in the material world, also material universe, comes from consciousness, together with energy and information. So it starts with consciousness. Consciousness is always everywhere, and the highest form of consciousness, non-local, the highest form you can call divine consciousness, or you can call it God of Allah, whatever you want to. It is beyond imagination, this highest form of consciousness, but everything comes from consciousness.
Now, I know at this point, again, my audience is going to have a lot of questions, and I just say bracket those questions. Join us live Tuesday, 4:30 Pacific Standard Time. Stephen Miller, one of the experts on near-death experiences, is going to give his thoughts and weigh into this. but maybe talk a little bit more about what research do you think still needs to be done? What are there certain kinds of studies that you would like to see done further to kind of move forward the evidence for near-death experiences?
To be honest, I don't think so. There have been
Oh,
four studies on prospective studies in near-death experience on survivors of cardiac arrest. That was a study from Sampani and Peter Fennick, a study from Bruce Grace, and a study from Penny Sartori from the UK. And it was a total of 562 survivors of cardiac arrest, and they all found the same figures. About between 10 and 20% of those patients who survived cardiac arrest mentioned in the death experience, and there was no physiological, medical, scientific explanation why those people reported near-death experience, and they all had a transformation as well. So I think the most important thing is that people should know about these kind of prospective studies. They should read about near-death experience. They should read books about it. They should YouTube interviews and be open and to be without prejudice. And then you change. You change. When you meet a person who will willing to share the NDE with you, you will change. I changed as well. I always say the people with an NDE have been my greatest teachers. They learned a lot. They learned me a lot. So you can change. You don't have to have an NDE yourself, but where you're open and interested, you change as well.
I'm wondering how a couple more questions for you, if that's okay, is I
Yeah,
think if I remember correctly, in the first 50 that you studied, you said 12, it was 12 or 18 reported some kind of near-death experience. Is that right?
yeah,
So none of them, again, I think you said had a hellish near-death experience. I've seen reports from 2 to 3% have that kind of experience, some 10%, even higher than that. I've seen some suggest 20, but it's hard enough to get people to share near-death experiences, let alone a hellish near-death experience, because it can feel like there's something wrong with me and I'm going to this terrible place. There's in my experience, an even greater reluctance to share that. How does that fit into your research? And have you seen that some as you've continued to study near-death experiences?
but you're totally right. I think there's a huge reluctance to share a positive NDE with others because the negative response they get, and when you have what we call a frightening NDE, I don't call it hellish, I call it a frightening NDE. There have been books published and articles published about frightening NDEs. I've met some people who had a frightening NDE, and a woman had been 2 evenings with me just crying and trying to share it with me. They feel guilty that they have that kind of experiences. But you have to remember that everything what we experience as the reality now here around us is based on our personal consciousness. I think when you're in love, the world is beautiful. And when you're depressed, the same world is awful. So it's a subjective aspect of what you experience. And that's the same in the where you have an aspect of depression or anxiety. Your experience you will have could be frightening as well. So it's not that you're wrong, but you're just having an experience in a small aspect of your consciousness, what could be frightening. And at last, there have been published articles that at last where you can share it with others and it is accepted. You also have a positive change, but it takes many more years than, even many more years than when you have a positive NDE. But
Yeah.
it happens. I've met people.
Oh, you have met. I haven't met people directly with a frightening or hellish near-death experience, but I've read a ton of accounts, did shows on that. It's as I'm thinking out loud, it seems to me that if people have subjective experiences, hellish and frightening, and that doesn't give evidence, say that there is a hell or an afterlife like that, then
No.
it would question the other subjective experiences that people have about the positive experiences, which for me, I'm reluctant to draw too much out of people's experiences with near-death experiences, except when they can be confirmed and objectively verified. That's what's most significant to me. So I'm reluctant to draw too much from frightening near-death experiences, but also draw too much from the positive ones for the reason that you just cited. Do you agree with that, or do you see it a little bit differently?
Well, I see it different. I think when you have the out-of-body experience, which you can corroborate vehicle perceptions, when you have the meet deceased people you don't know they were dead, when you have the life review, what you did, what you have done and thought and acted, and you give the insight that may try to help people to be nice or help people to help. There are two different kind of energies as well. So you try to live different after an NDE, and the transformation is the objective proof of the subjective experience. So, and it was statistical significance. So the transformation for me is objective proof of subjective experience. And there's so much universal aspects of the elements people share with you. It's not an accident at all. It's just universal.
Okay, all right. I have a ton more questions about that because it seems to me
Yeah.
that the frightening aspect would also be a part of the universal experiences that many people have. But we can let that go for now. Last question, and then we'll let you go. It's actually morning here where I'm at, and it's night for you. It's probably dinner time.
No, it's just evening. It's not too late.
It's evening. Okay. So I heard you in one interview describe that it's made you read the Bible. I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Obviously, I'm a Christian. I'm an apologist. That's my worldview. But after studying near-death experiences, did it make you read the Bible in a way you hadn't before? And did you land on any sense of maybe who you think Jesus is?
No. To be honest, I never have been reading the Bible
Mm,
before as a child. My mother went to church sometimes, and my father was mere agnostic. But I was intrigued by hearing all those stories in the death experience, a meeting and being of light, and they called it Jesus. So I started to read, especially the New Testament, but I also started to read Buddhistic,
mm,
Tibetan Buddhism. Was reading the Vedas about Hinduism, reading the Kabbalah, the Gnostic Christianity, etc., the Baha'i. And it all comes to the same message. It's all about unconditional love, wisdom, insight. And Jesus, for me, is an example of a mystic who has direct contact with the highest form of divine consciousness. He could know what other people thought and feel. He knew he knew the future. He would communicate with the highest form of consciousness, what you call God. A very, very special man, very
mm,
special. He could heal people. So, and also people with an near-death experience have healing capacity as well, also self-healing, like Anita Bajani, but also they can have healing hands and help other people when they have pain or other things.
mm,
So your also body becomes an instrument for healing, healing energy as well.
mm.
So a lot comes together. And I think the main message of all world religion is it's about love.
Mm,
It's just about love, unconditional love.
mm.
And that's the message people with an NDE tell us also.
All right. At this point, my audience is going, wait a minute, Sean, ask him this, push back here, press that. I'm not going to for this conversation because I asked you to come on and talk about your research and just share your data and how it affected you. And you've been gracious with your time to do so. I thoroughly enjoyed your book, Consciousness Beyond Life, The Science of Near-Death Experience. It's very thorough,
Yeah.
very well documented. I can see why you said the Lancet, a prestigious journal, would document your research because it's footnoted and it's supported and I think rigorously argued. So I want to make sure I invite back people watching this going, wait a minute, Sean, what about this? What about that? I go, hang on. We'll talk about that Tuesday night, bringing Stephen Miller on to take your questions and address this. But for now, I really want to thank you for taking your time all the way across the country in your evening to talk about your fascinating research and for joining me.
I enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, folks. And make sure you hit subscribe. We've got some other shows coming up. We will keep coming back to near-death experiences, evidence for the afterlife, evidence for the soul, evidence for heaven, evidence for the Bible. We're going to cover that here. And again, join us Tuesday night. Actually, Dr. Steve Miller, who's written 4 books on near-death experiences, will be here in person, in studio, the first time at Biola to take your questions. So join us then. And again, Dr. van Lommel, thanks so much for your time. This is a treat.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.